For many years, the world of freight in America ran east to west as imports primarily came from Europe and then moved across to the western portions of the country. In the 20th century, things shifted as China and the Far East became manufacturing hubs and transported their goods to West Coast ports and then eastward throughout the rest of America. Now in the 21st century, a new frontier has emerged in the form of Mexico. With lower labor costs and the added benefit of being right on the U.S. border, Mexico has become the U.S.'s largest trade partner and has been a haven for companies to relocate in order to move goods to the U.S. across much shorter distances and also shorten their supply chains. But is it all too much, too quickly? Is business moving faster than expectation? Is Mexico ready to take on the weight of freight of a 21st century superpower? We'll take a look next on FreightWaves Presents. And welcome to FreightWaves Presents. I'm Bill Priestley. Mexico is a country of some 126 million people, about a third of the United States, and 3.5 times that of Canada. Its climate boasts year-round capabilities, and its inhabitants have certainly respected the benefits created by being neighbors with the largest economy in the world. However, with the latest nearshoring moves made by companies off both coasts, what has been a wave of economic growth has the capability of turning into a tsunami. With that, let's set the stage for you. Mexico has never been a stranger to companies that wanted to move operations there to take advantage of better financial terms, as well as lower labor costs and lower regulation. But recent history shows COVID-19's emergence and China effectively shutting down operations caused a scare in the Far East and promoted more industries to think about nearshoring in Mexico. Even some Chinese manufacturers have moved operations to Mexico to take advantage of the shorter trip to move goods into America. Over the last several years, announcement after announcement let people know that moving to Mexico was more than a fad. It was proving to make good business sense. Even American companies like Tesla announced that they were building manufacturing facilities south of the border. But now that wave of growth has started to make a major impression on the Western economy. Laredo, Texas has been the largest port in the United States for 4 of the last 5 months. Mexico is steadily remaining the U.S.'s top trade partner. One congressman has stated that he saw U.S.-Mexico trade would eclipse the $1 trillion mark in 2028 after being somewhere around $800 billion this year. Yet is all of this growth too quick for a nation that has very little infrastructure or investment, and not to mention a small government that probably isn't equipped to take on the task of regulating all this new industry? How does Mexico deal with the unusual element of drug cartels that control much of the northern part of the country? Certainly, the potential for unbelievable growth is there, but is it sustainable, and will it only be available to the first players that appeared on Mexican soil? Or is this truly a Mexican gold mine that can pay out for decades to come? Joining us now to talk about it and kind of set the stage, if you will, Noy Mahoney, our Borderlands writer, joins us from San Antonio, Texas. Noy, thanks so much for stopping in. And you've written obviously a lot about this issue over the course of the last several years or so. But as you look at it, what is your general feeling right now about what's happening in Mexico in terms of this boom in economic activity and what it means for that country and how they want to capitalize on it?
Yeah, the pandemic really sort of set the stage for Mexico to really benefit from this shifting supply chains, global supply chains. And especially it was sort of unusual timing that the pandemic happened while we were getting a new North American trade agreement, the United States-Mexico-Canada trade agreement. And those two things sort of coinciding at the same time really is providing Mexico with a golden opportunity to benefit from, as I said earlier, shifting supply chains. What Mexico has been doing and needs to continue to do is, keep attracting foreign direct investments, making sure businesses know that, this country or Mexico is a secure place to do business. Other things, Mexico needs to keep improving its road infrastructure and port infrastructure to make sure that the freight can flow, freely across North America. Other things that Mexico has been working on, doing a better job of, is improving its labor rights and labor pool, making sure that you know factory workers, manufacturing workers are being paid sort of what they deserve, something that hasn't always been, a part of Mexico. And other things include improving road security. That's one of the big ones, and that's one I hear over and over from trucking companies and trade operators, is that Mexico needs to do a better job of clamping down on cargo theft, which has been a real problem in the country historically.
We had a little bit of that this morning on FreightWaves Now. Of course, a strike was averted at least for 3 months or so on that very issue. And you alluded to a number of issues that you brought up in an article that you wrote back in February on 5 things Mexico needs to do to kind of capitalize on this. One of those things that you mentioned here that you didn't mention in that article was safety. In that article, or in terms of what Mexico needs to be able to kind of get more of a grasp of. How much of that is just a complete outlier? Because you don't really see this that much in terms of a deterrent of trying to invest in a company. All of a sudden you have to deal with an element of crime, an element that you can't trust at all, unless in certain cases you can pay it off. But what's this been like in terms of dealing with that element in helping Mexico, or trying to help Mexico achieve some potential in this endeavor?
Yeah, as I said, it's always been a problem in Mexico, and it seems since the pandemic, since I've been writing about Mexico trade, cargo theft has been increasing, month to month, year to year, every year. And as we talked about earlier this morning, Truck Driving Association, that almost went on strike this week. That was one of their top demands, that the government in Mexico, the National Guard, which is a law enforcement arm that patrols the national highways, they basically demanded, the National Guard to step up their patrols, to do more to patrol the highways, to protect, truck drivers. Truck drivers, they say, are being, robbed, kidnapped, beaten on a daily basis. And so it's a very scary situation sometimes for these drivers, trying to haul goods, through Mexico and up to, the U.S.-Mexico border. And one of the things we saw over the weekend was the National Guard agreeing to step up and do more to patrol the highways. So we'll see how that plays out over the next 3 months or a few months.
As you look at this situation right now, obviously there are a lot of people that are very bullish about moving to Mexico. Obviously Tesla moved down there, put a factory down there as well. What is the sky the limit there, or are there still reservations for even those that are bullish about what the possibilities are in moving more business to Mexico and Central America?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the sky is the limit, but there are some, concerns in terms of, I mentioned earlier, security. Is Mexico a secure place to put a factory? Will they honor, will the court systems, honor a business contract? That's been something that some people question. But nearshoring is arriving, and maybe this is just the first wave, and we're going to see more, even larger waves of nearshoring. So the key for Mexico will be not is nearshoring going to happen? It is happening, and will they be able to capitalize on it as a government? On a federal level, I know on the state level, a lot of state governors are really doing everything they can to open up their states to new factories. Tesla going into the state of Nuevo León was a real big win for that state. So we'll see if the federal government can really do its part and keep the country, keep foreign direct investment flowing into the country.
One last question here for you. As you look kind of forward, and you kind of did there just a second ago, in terms of what's coming, obviously there's been a wave that's come in. Is this expected to expand in terms of the number of companies, or at least certainly the amount of interest that is headed down there, or is this something that you see maybe tapering off, plateauing, if you will, for right now?
For my part, I still see it as a growth pattern, as more companies arriving in Mexico. Like I said, this is might be just the first wave, and we could see even more in terms of, automotive manufacturers, medical equipment, industrial machinery, clothing, furniture. We could see a little bit of all of that. And so I think, really the sky is the limit. And it's just how well can the Mexican government take advantage of this golden opportunity.
That's something we'll definitely be talking about with our next two guests. But Noy, thanks so much for joining us, and keep up the good writing there on our Borderlands column on FreightWaves.com.
Thank you so much.
All right, joining us now to talk about this, we have Leticia Rodriguez, Director of Marketing and Carrier Development at the operations for ILS Company in Tucson, Arizona. And we've got Jordan DeWatt, President of Redwood Logistics in Mexico, Redwood Logistics Mexico, I should say, at that particular time. So both of you, thanks so much for joining us here at this particular point. Leticia, let me first address you in terms of kind of what you just heard, and also your impressions of the situation as you've seen it right now. What is the impression of investment in Mexico, nearshoring, and how do you see it playing out in the near future? Think we may have an audio issue there, Leticia. We'll check on that in just a second here. Jordan, let me just check over to you if I can. In terms of your impressions of what's going on in Mexico, obviously you've got a lot of experience down there in terms of what you see. Is this going to be a big boom economically, or could it possibly be a big bust as well?
Yeah, thanks, and great to be on the show today. I've been doing business in Mexico since they signed the NAFTA agreement in the mid-'90s, and we've come a long way since then, but nothing like we've seen in the last couple of years. I think there's no doubt that there'll be a huge boom of business in Mexico, and really, if you look at it in 2023, which is already up over 2022. This is just a lull. A lot of these factories, new factories and new investment haven't even come online yet. So the best is yet to come, so to speak. There's no question that there'll be massive growth in Mexico across the board.
Leticia, let me throw it back to you in terms of what your impressions are of the current situation.
We're good?
Yep, we're good.
Okay. All right. So yeah, everything, I agree with what Noy mentioned, and the right now it's here to stay. It's going to keep growing. There's a lot of different, there's other options. Mexico provides an option for even like the smaller shippers that maybe just want to have a consignment order, and are actually not manufacturing in Mexico, but they technically have a little bit of a presence here and can actually distribute to the big automotive companies. And then there's the ones that are going to establish themselves in Mexico and continue that growth. As you mentioned, Tesla's there. We're seeing Chinese companies take interest. So we just have to work through the hurdles of, the SAT requirements that we have, the Cartaporte. But it's definitely here to stay, and looking forward to seeing that growth.
So let me throw up a chart here, if I can, in terms of what we kind of seen a little bit on the border here. And what you're seeing here are just numbers. This is market share that has come out of several different borderline territories. The white line there you see is Laredo, Texas. The purple line is Phoenix. The orange line is McAllen, Texas, and just for comparison, the yellow line down there at the bottom is Ontario in California. And you can certainly see, if you go back to 2019, kind of where that chart starts, everyone's kind of basically at the same spot, where you're seeing on the right end of the chart 60-70% growth in those border towns there as well. And so, Jordan, let me throw it to you. As you look at this, this looks like almost exponential growth at some point that can't even be sustained if it continues to go up at that particular rate and continues to do that. How do you measure in terms of what's moving the needle in terms of Mexico as this newfound destination, and does it need to slow down a little bit?
Yeah, I think there's no question that with everything that's projected to grow in Mexico, so many companies going down, that the demand side will be huge. But when you talk about the supply side, look, the railroads aren't building any major new tracks. It's still very similar as it was many, many years ago. The Mexican truckers are not being aggressive in terms of adding more equipment. So there just won't be that supply to meet that demand. And I really would forecast equipment constraints, capacity constraints, even excess of what we saw during COVID. So we're really headed towards a perfect storm once all of these factories come online.
Yeah, it seems like that. Leticia, what do you see when you look at that chart and all of a sudden you've got a massive, massive amount of growth, especially in these border towns in terms of the traffic that's coming across the border?
Yeah, we're seeing that already. I mean, there's a lot of especially on the northbound shipping. There's every truck that's coming down southbound already has a northbound load ready, and rates are going up. So we're seeing that already. So I agree with that. And I think there's some programs that there are for the border to expedite the crossing process, whether in Laredo and Nogales, Tijuana. Like the FAST program combined with the CT patch, so it allows for a faster crossing. So there might be, I can see that probably getting becoming something that'll be used more, but it does require, the carriers to have a good security practices in place. So I think it'll be something that we'll see an increase of, and maybe an increase of fast lanes to help accommodate that demand. So there's things that can be done. But I do agree, we're seeing it now. So if that continues, we'll be in a little bit more of a crunch in a few more years.
Jordan, I brought up the safety issue with Noy just a couple of minutes ago in terms of how dangerous sometimes this can be, especially for Mexican truckers and maybe even rail as well. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis said that at the GOP debate that he would like to put in troops on the ground and try to knock out the cartels. Now, I'm not going to ask you to comment on that at all per se, but suffice it to say, what would this relationship be like between Mexico and the United States if the cartels were not there?
Yeah, I think things would be growing a lot more quickly. I think a lot of companies that are, resistant to expanding outside the United States would be going into Mexico. There's no doubt that this violence and insecurity in Mexico is impacting the potential growth. We don't see any major improvements going on. Like Noy mentioned, both of the major trucking associations in Mexico are holding protests. It's the number one ask that they have for the government, and things are not getting better. I think it could be the one thing that could derail the potential success of Mexico. So we've got our eye on it very, very closely.
Yeah, definitely something to consider as well. Leticia, as far as what you see, obviously it can be a dangerous game in promoting and transporting freight across Mexico. Is there how much of an impact do the cartels, in your estimation and your experience, are they having on the freight world?
I see it more on the southern states. Further down, I guess further south than Querétaro seems to be more of a problem. The northern areas has a little bit more infrastructure, and there's certain hot spots, down in the Reynosa area. So I feel that the truckers, unfortunately, have a really dangerous job right now. And if you're trying to cover a load from further south, it just becomes really difficult because they build in the rates are increased because they have to pay off a cartel person because they need to pass, and also they're charging more because of the security, or they just don't want to do it in certain areas. So it's going to be interesting how that the government, which I know they came to an agreement just today or just recently this weekend, and if the government is able to protect them, it'll make the trucker job a lot more attractive. But right now, it's just they don't want to risk it, and it's understandable. It's a tough situation to be in.
Let's take a look at the how this is going to be, or at least how it's trying to be manifested, and what the Mexican government is trying to do there as well. Jordan, when you look at the situation, does the Mexican government, in your opinion, have an idea of that it can perhaps be able to regulate and be able to kind of close in on making sure that everything runs essentially relatively properly in this case, or do they need outside help in order to try and capitalize on this economic opportunity that they have?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. Obviously, you had President Felipe Calderon two terms ago try and take on the cartels unsuccessfully. This government currently is, in my opinion, not doing enough to attack all of the violence and all the cargo theft, among many other crimes being committed in Mexico. So they're really leaving it on the private sector to obviously have things like satellite tracking in their trailers, all of their secure routes, private security companies, and then also a true real cost, which is insurance, Mexico cargo insurance in Mexico. So I think the government in Mexico could be doing a lot more. I don't believe that they're capable of fixing this problem themselves.
Leticia, what's your take on whether or not the Mexican government can at least try to apprehend the situation and deal with it as best they can, or do they need some outside help?
Well, like he mentioned, it's been tried before, and the cartel seems to be more powerful, than the government. So it is going to be a very difficult feat. I don't know if they'll be able to do it within the next few years, just because of it's so ingrained in their culture and just the way Mexico is now. I know what we do is just we end up getting escort vehicles. We end up getting the insurance and offer that as part of the package, and I don't even know if outside help, just because of the violence it brings in to civilians. So it's something that must be considered as well.
Yeah, it's something it's often been said, it's the price of doing business sometimes to try and do that there as well. Moving on from the negative to the positive, what are you most bullish about when it comes to Mexico? For instance, not too long ago, of course, we had the CPKC merger, which basically effectively said that you could get on a train in Mexico City and not get off of that train until it hit the Atlantic or Pacific coast of Canada at that particular time. Is that becoming a boom for another reason, of course, to invest in Mexico? Because now, of course, you can transport with one carrier all the way to the southern border of Canada. Jordan?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll actually be speaking later next month at IANA with both railroads, and that'll be a major focus of our conversation there. So I think, the intermodal option is excellent right now. It's providing a capacity and a much needed market. It provides things like improved security, like we were just talking about. However, it is still limited in terms of capacity at this time. So I'm not sure the exact figure of intermodal to truck, but it's still less than 20% of the overall market. So when you talk about being able to step up to the huge demand that's coming, it's going to have to come from the truckload side, in my opinion.
Leticia, it's kind of the same question, but also as you look at what are the other needs, perhaps that need to be addressed inside of being able to make Mexico that alternative option. Obviously, that rail option makes a lot of sense for a lot of people that certainly do business in not only the United States but also Canada as well. What else does Mexico need to concern itself with as it moves forward with this?
Well, one of the hurdles that we're finding with rail is, the time it takes. It's still longer, and a lot of the industries in Mexico right now, like a big one is automotive, and typically, a lot of the stuff moves just in time, or just become, they're really costly if you get into line down situations. So I think you have to consider the commodity that's moving. There's the same difference as far as on the trucking side, that you see a lot more northbound than southbound. Same on the rail. And there is a capacity issue as far as container availability in the Mexican markets. And I think that's going to be a big hurdle as well. And it drives costs, up, and having to move empty equipment down to the areas that are needed.
Well, we started off with a pretty good notion that the sky could possibly be the limit in terms of where things could possibly go with Mexico. But let me wrap up this discussion. Jordan, in terms of where you see the potential of where this could go, a lot of people see, we're possibly seeing $1 trillion crossing the border in 2028. That's just 5 short years away from now. Massive growth needs to happen in order to accomplish that. But as you look at it, what is the potential of what could possibly happen to Mexico if they manage it correctly?
Obviously, huge potential. We were seeing so many new products. I think that's the most encouraging thing to me, from high tech, automotive, obviously, but also aerospace, food and beverage. So it runs the gamut of products that are being made in Mexico now. Like Noy said, and you just mentioned, truly the sky is the limit. However, when we talk about things that could derail it, from security to capacity, status quo is not going to cut it. We're going to have to do things differently. And I know a much overused term in the U.S. is becoming a shipper of choice. But the U.S. market had to do that to meet the current market conditions, right? With not enough drivers. Mexico is going to have to do that same thing. And companies are going to need to do things a lot more efficiently than they're doing things today. They're going to be able to turn equipment and shorten loading and unloading times, because we're just going to have to do a lot more with the same infrastructure that we have today.
Okay, Leticia, quickly, I've got about 10 seconds left. Is the sky the limit here for Mexico?
It is. It's constraints that he mentioned, but I think overall they're going to be worked through, and hopefully we pick up the speed. In Mexico, that's really all that's needed there.
All right, Leticia Rodriguez and Jordan DeWard, thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see how this all plays out over the course of the next decade.
Thank you.
All right, that's going to do it for this edition of FreightWaves Presents. Coming up next on our episode in 2 weeks, when as this freight economy begins to turn, will you be ready with your team to take advantage of the opportunities that you can create? We'll be joined by two of the best in the business in marketing and sales by Digital Dispatch's Blythe Brumleve and Put the Coffee Down host and sales pro Kevin Hill. They'll go through the playbook on how to be successful in 2024, what you need to know, what you need to do now, and how to implement it all. How to beat the system. That's coming up in mid-September. For our entire crew here on FreightWaves Presents, I'm Bill Priestley. We'll see you next time.